But we do have to take care of local business. And the local business is good. Good especially for the Stony Brook Seawolves women's basketball team. They made a trip up north, and it paid off for them with their fourth straight win. And, Ken, the good things just keep on happening for this team.
Yeah, looking at both squads, the women's program definitely stepped up and showed up this week. No question about it. Getting big win at Vermont on Wednesday and following up with an even bigger win against UNH today. And UNH squad, they're struggling a bit for sure, but Stony Brook, they're proving they're still among the most dominant teams in the American East Conference. 4 straight wins, winners of 6 out of their last 7. And honestly, guys, a big reason why they have so much success is just because of how dynamic the offense is. Virtually every game now, including these past 2, they have at least 4 scorers hitting double digits in points.
And Jake, I know you, of course, and Greg have had a chance to watch this team firsthand. And the great thing I see with this team is that it's starting to find itself and establish its game and impose its game on other teams. The Vermont game, which Greg and I did, was a perfect example of that. Vermont plays a similar style to Stony Brook, but they tried to chuck threes left and right, weren't hitting them. Stony Brook didn't need to hit them because they were doing what they did best. Stretch front court play and draw a lot of fouls. And it worked for them, and every formula they've tried so far has been working for them. Now, the video gets around. Everybody knows that. Part of the usual game prep for any team. But you can study the video in Stony Brook. You know what they're going to do, but they're just going to keep on doing it until somebody stops them.
Well, Matt, I think they're just so athletic with their guards that they're able to push the pace of play. And then they have that nice complement on the inside with a couple of the bigs, including Wool, where I really love her shooting motion. Just watching her play the other day on Wednesday, I was very impressed with the way that she played. And, I also liked, and I thought had a very nice game today, was Boucher when she gets in off the bench. She is a real spark for the team as well, too.
Yeah, both big compliments.
Good.
And especially just on Wool, her coming in last season, but really this season, I think really stepping up in her role. And what makes her dangerous is she's a big who's able to shoot inside and out. And a lot of teams don't really strategize planning against her defensively, or rather when she's on the offense outside of the perimeter. She's usually someone who's so consistent inside because defensively she's a great glass cleaner for the squad. But even in today's game, for example, there weren't a lot of 3-pointers going down on either side, but Wool was left wide open in the left corner, and she drained a 3-pointer because not a lot of teams really expect her to be shooting from outside the arc. And she was able to produce 12 points today, and in Vermont's game as well, be a dominant scorer. I think we're right behind Pagan in terms of scoring in double digits.
Kenneth, I think that's a good point because what she does is she pulls the bigs out to play defense away from the basket, and it gives the guards an opportunity to really attack the hoop. And she does have that nice shooting motion. I think, Matt, we talked about it the other night where we felt like, she has a very European-esque feel to her game.
That's what I was about to mention. I was going to say you said that, you just did again. That is a perfect way to describe her game. But go on.
And I do think you're right though, Kenneth, about their I noticed today that their free throw shooting was a little down, and that has been kind of like their bread and butter a little bit. Not shooting great from the 3-point arc though. Still at 15% today, right?
15% today. That was, I think, among the lowest all season.
Yeah, 46 from the floor, which I thought was a good effort for them
that's big.
as well too. And I think they did what they were supposed to do to a UNH team today.
Right.
I think Vermont put them in more peril because I think Vermont had some a little bit more dynamic guards, and they had a couple of bigs that they were able to put in and really frustrate some of the bigs for Stony Brook. But they went up to UNH today, and I think they cleaned up the way that they were supposed to. And that's kind of what you begin to expect, Matt. What you were talking earlier 4 in a row, you're beginning to find who you are. You go up and get a win today the way that you expected to win. And I think that's the maturation that they're in right now.
The only thing that bothers me, though, from today's box score in particular, this is a game, of course, that was on the road that we didn't air, was the fact that they took 19 three-pointers, which is really not their game, and hit only 3 of them, which is nobody's game. Nobody wants to hit 3 for 19. But look at how far ahead they were. They might as well see if they can establish something here. But that, I'm afraid, first of all, any aspect of a team's game that's considered a weakness is something you have to be watching out for down the stretch. And this is the stretch. This is the conference run. And we will get into that because we have some great news for you folks. NJIT lost the game. We have some bad news too. Albany still hasn't, but we'll get into that. But that is something, again, that opposing teams are going to be looking at. If we plug up the inside, push them out to the perimeter, and they're chucking threes all day long, they're not going to hit them.
Yeah.
And
go ahead.
Sorry, Kenneth, you go.
All right. For this Stony Brook squad, it's, to me, what makes them so dangerous, as just to reiterate again, is just their guards. Annie Warren being an example of that, averaging, I think, 14 points per contest. She led the game against Vermont with 16. Just her ability, along with Gigi Gonzalez and Erlette Scott, those 3 really just being so great, both in terms of scoring and passing, where they could do it down low, do it mid-range. And even today, Gonzalez made that great dish to Wool for the open three-pointer, just driving down towards the basket, because they just pull in all the guards and defenders to where, strategizing against Stony Brook, you kind of think are the center of this offense, or Gonzalez, and then you leave a player open and they're able to convert more often than not. Greg.
It's funny. Between Anastasia Warren and Leah Murray-Wool, both of them had decent field goal percentages in general, 5 for 10, 5 for 11. Warren was 2 for 6 from 3. Leah Murray-Wool was 1 for 5. And when you look at that, that means Wool was 4 for 6 inside the arc, and that means Warren was 3 for 4 inside the arc. So that proves our point once again, that if they drive and draw lots of fouls and and take shorter shots, they're in their game. But as soon as, and again, they had a comfortable lead, they could afford to do it. But in a tight game, that could be a deciding factor.
Like we saw against New Jersey.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think you're really hitting on it. If they get caught in a 3-point shooting competition here, in like you were saying against NJIT, where they get forced out into that action, it means their transition game has been slowed down. It means they're really not playing the pace of play that they want to play. Man, I think if you bring up a good point, today is today. Right, you have the opportunity to let it fly a little bit, see if you can get somebody hot, see if you can maybe get somebody find the flame a little bit from the outside. But in a real heated competition, right, that's not going to be what they're looking to do. And then how do you inject transition offense if it becomes a half court type of game that could I think could really hurt the Seagulls.
I count that a little bit just because in cases where they've been pressed, especially in the half court, I think they've done a good job giving it to one of those bigs and then finding an outlet pass to one of those guards on the wing and getting scores that way, where they're still able to find a way to cut inside. And yeah, maybe they don't rely on the 3 game as much in those scenarios, but this team has proven they're multi-dimensional, which is huge, because I feel like the same critiques we're kind of giving this women's program could really be applied more towards the men's side, as we saw this week against Vermont, to where that was an example of you had a 3-point shooting going on, and eventually Vermont won out, and Stony Brook offense just shut down, as soon as Vermont had a pretty substantial lead. In Stony Brook's case, I haven't seen them in any game so far this season, really down, even when they've fallen behind. They've had a couple losses already, but still, to me, they're still finding ways to keep that offense up and finding ways to adjust and adapt in defenses. Is this one squad?
And go ahead, Greg.
I just think when you're 4-1 in the conference and you're on a 4-game winning streak, it's easy for us to point out and be critical.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's the time where it's kind of like, all right, let's find something that they're not doing well potentially. And if that's it, then that's it. But they are playing beautiful basketball.
Agreed.
They are playing they're playing the style that they want to play. And that would be the one critique would be the 3-point, but hey, they could get it going and that could become something that becomes, maybe not the centerpiece of their game, but certainly something that could be like a utilitarian part. They do it and they can complete it when necessary.
Agreed. And it's funny too because you touched on it earlier. Really, they're the team that we see a lot of similarities in with Stony Brook is NJIT, which is the one team that was better than Stony Brook, and now they lost today. So now they're at the same record as Stony Brook with 4-1. But statistically, both of these squads are nearly identical. They're 1-2 in the conference in terms of scoring in conference action. Margins of victory are pretty close shooting wise. Both teams, NJIT has the better shooting percentage at 44% to 37%. But in terms of field goals made, it's only a 5 field goal difference in NJIT's favor. And defense wise, they're nearly identical. So, I feel like really that game, the one loss they had so far, kind of shows those flaws and shows kind of what Seals need to improve on if they want to repeat as conference champions.
Okay, so go ahead, Greg.
And I think an early season conference loss is not necessarily a bad thing if it refocuses you, gets you to kind of think about where you need to improve, what you need to work on, and then continue to figure out how to highlight what you're good at. That could be a foregone or a forgotten game by the time March rolls around.
Right.
If everything works out for the Seawolves, but could also be a very influential game on the team as the year goes on because it refocuses you and gets you to play the way that you want to play.
Great.
Okay, so let's take a look at how this affects the Seawolves in the standings right now. As we said, NJIT finally lost a game. Only problem is they lost to the only undefeated team in the conference, which happens to be Albany. Albany won 62-54 yesterday in Newark. Vermont beat UMBC 69-36, and UMass Lowell and Hartford was postponed. And also, there was a game supposed to be between Maine and Binghamton today that was also postponed. That's another can of worms, and we've discussed that ad nauseum. We are going to find out, obviously, when some of these makeups are going to be scheduled. There's supposed to be a men's game at home yesterday and against New Hampshire. That game got rescheduled for Monday, February 7th. That is on WUSB.FM/sports, by the way. And anytime we do get an update, we'll let you know. Only problem is we only found out about that one Friday morning. So these things come on very short notice. That also means that if you want to go watch some of these games, constantly check the schedule because it is changing on almost daily basis. Friendly warning there. So Albany, of course, is a future opponent of the Seawolves. They have not faced them yet this year. As a matter of fact, if we want to go to the schedule, we'll tell you when they face them. This Saturday, at home, 1:45 here on WUSB. In the meantime, there's a game on Wednesday against Binghamton. The men play tomorrow. But they will be facing the only undefeated team in the America East Conference as of this moment. I haven't looked at Albany's schedule yet. I don't know if there's a game in between, but I'll tell you that right now.
I actually have it up in front of me right now. They played NJIT yesterday, right? So then they go tomorrow at Hartford. Wednesday they got UMBC home.
Ooh.
And then Saturday is at Stony Brook. So they're playing 4 games in a week here. So I think that sets up nicely for the Seawolves, having them come into Stony Brook and really being peppered with some heavy competition, right up until that game is played. So I think that's really good for the Seawolves. And they have a weird start time, Albany does, on Wednesday, an 11 a.m. start for a basketball game on Wednesday, which I think is an odd time.
That's really weird. I mean, you'd expect that tomorrow. I mean, our game is at 3 o'clock because of Martin Luther King Day, and the Knicks have a game at noon, and afternoon basketball is a tradition on MLK Day, which is great. But in the middle of the week, that early on a Wednesday, that means it's probably the only time they could have gotten time in the arena for, which, again, is something that we're going to be looking at when some of these games finally do get made up. The last thing, as we say over and over again, any conference wants is to have to decide a regular season champion or playoff seeding, for that matter, based on teams playing different numbers of games and not necessarily facing each other. They want everybody to play the same number of games against the same teams, and it's fair that way.
Yeah, we saw both of those
you
last year.
You don't want to lose your division by half a game.
Exactly. We saw both of those last year with the women's basketball tournament in the America East being set up that way, where 4 teams pulled out. A couple didn't really get to finish their season. So you had a bunch of, teams who didn't have the same number of games played in the season, with seeding being set up. Obviously worked in Stony Brook's favor. They won it all. And obviously the baseball season ending the way it did last year because of
that was
weather and
it was of rain.
Right. But it still decided not on the game itself. Right.
But in any case, the NCAA wants a champion by Selection Sunday because they want to be able to seed said champion properly. If somehow Hartford pulls off a miracle in the America East tournament, either men or women, and they get in, they're playing. If a traditional power like a Stony Brook, of Vermont, or an Albany get in, they're probably a 13.
Yeah, agreed.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
I would say especially in the women's bracket as well too. In that one, 13, 14 for the men as well too. But I think with the women, if it's Stony Brook that gets in, you're looking at 3 years in a row of making the NCAA tournament, and I think that kind of elevates you in the status of the NCAA tournament.
Well, that's what makes that Washington State win so significant. That team finished 6th in the Pac-12 and was a 9 seed in last year's tournament. And Stony Brook beat them at home.
I think that's a really good point. Yeah, because that shows a strength of schedule when you can go out of schedule and win. It kind of improves the America East view within the conference committee, within the tournament committee.
Especially because the last 2 seasons, those programs only been improving in terms of seeding projections, based on things like bracketology and, just doing the stats and analysis on it. Because back in eventually ended up being the canceled NCAA tournament because of the virus. Some girls projected 15 seed. And then when it came time last year, obviously they were 14 going up against number 3 Arizona State. So, yeah, that's something that's definitely, they're not thinking about it. They're focused on the next game. But, just for us here, they're slowly moving up. And I think as long as they continue to carry that success they've had for a lot of the season, especially the past few games, they definitely ride this hot streak all the way into the NCAA tournament.
Well, it's really a tale of 2 cities with the America East. Go ahead.
I think the key is when you get hot here. Like we were talking on Wednesday, is NJIT hot early and then you kind of cool off late? I mean, you love winning as a coach and as a player, of course, you love winning as well too. But there is something to coming out and playing really well early, and then you're almost kind of like hanging on and hoping you continue to finish strong. Where sometimes it's easier, you lose a couple games early and you can kind of, climb the mountain a little bit as the season goes on and then really propel yourself and get going. So I don't know. I don't know which is right and which is wrong. You love to go undefeated, but
well, it is a tale of 2 cities. When you take a look at the streaks that these teams are on, Albany's got the longest active one in the conference right now, 7 straight. Seawolves have won 4 in a row. NJIT had a nice streak going before Albany stopped it. Okay, Maine is back to return to winning ways, and they're 3-2 in the conference. Vermont, of course, they won after Stony Brook beat them earlier in the week. But your bottom 5 teams are all on losing streaks. Binghamton's lost 3 in a row. Lowell's lost 4 in a row. UMBC's lost 11 in a row. Hartford's lost 13 in a row. And New Hampshire's lost 10 in a row. And the only reason Hartford is above New Hampshire in the standings is they're 0-2 and New Hampshire's 0-4.
Yeah, it is, unlike the men who we're going to transfer to now, it's the race isn't necessarily as competitive, I think, in the women's squad. You got definitely 4 or 5 teams you're pretty confident is going to make it that you could really choose from, like NGIT, Vermont, Stony Brook, Albany, on the men's side, it's still kind of up for grabs.
Well, you mentioned the conference, Matt, and, you look at the upcoming schedule, you really got to take care of business if you're the women. And with Saturday's matchup against Albany, you go all the way down to the bottom of the schedule and you play at Albany to end the season. That could be, the decider.
It's true. Or even decider for a 2 or 3 seed. Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
Stony Brook, at this point, forget about the preseason hype. Stony Brook has reason to believe that it is the best team in the conference. And they'll have a chance to prove it when they face Albany on Saturday. But, of course, things can happen. COVID can happen. It's already been happening.
Yeah.
So, taking a look.
Or the offense will kind of taper off. Just transitioning to the men's side now. The offense taper off to where, an offense that was there during the weekend or, a few games ago isn't really there anymore. And you're going up against defenses who have an answer for your game plan.
Well, speaking of which, the last game the men played was earlier this week at Vermont on Wednesday, while the women were playing, of course, at home, which is the policy in the America East. And they were dealt arguably the worst loss they've had so far this year. Wagner was a stinker on December 4th. Let's be honest. Florida, we write off because they're Florida. But Vermont, 98-65. Your main rival, at least athletically, if not necessarily traditionally, Albany is obviously. This game, wow. Vermont outscores Stony Brook 53-39 in the first half, 45-26 in the second half, and just dominates end to end, and basically shows Stony Brook who's still boss.
Well, yeah, no doubt about it. It was an ugly game, and we've seen times where this Stony Brook men's basketball team can become a little too reliant on the 3-pointer. And, when it's not going down, it can get ugly fast. And I think that's part of what played into it the other night for them.
Well, the women can compensate when they're not hitting from 3 because we've seen it. I mean, you saw the box scores from the last few games. They will drive. They will go down to the low post. They'll draw fouls. They'll go to the line when the 3 isn't working.
Yeah.
So
on top of that, too, the women play real good defense. Are the best in the conference along with NGIT. The men were shooting 55% that first 7 from the field. Problem is, it really doesn't matter when Vermont's shooting 20 of 29 for nearly 69% rate, including 11 3-pointers in the first half alone.
It's just sick what they did. 19 for 30. Did I read that right? Yes. 19 for 30 from 3-point range. That's nearly 2/3. That's 63.3%, in case you're wondering. But 11 for 16, as Ken just said. How do you stop that?
Yeah, and
work the perimeter, push them out, make them drive. That's what you do.
And in that first half, it wasn't necessarily. Yeah, it wasn't necessarily being lackadaisical because I thought for the most part they were still hanging in there against Vermont, really until the end of the first half, final couple minutes. But, they were still on the same gear, I thought, because Stony Brook did shoot 8 of 13 from three-point range that first half, which doesn't equal Vermont's doing, but you're still around that area, And again, both teams shot about 50%, so it's not like Vermont necessarily played tremendous defense on the Seawolves. Problem really came in that second half, where Vermont just kept piling it on and on and on, and you saw this change to where the offense kind of shut off. It switched really from, I thought, team play to guys trying to play hero ball. And, for as good as guys like Jenkins and Green and Roberts and Olani have been this season, and Olani for his career as a Seawolf, playing hero ball in this scenario, especially against a Vermont team, just isn't going to get it done. And it's something, honestly, they should know better, especially a veteran like Olani. I'm not saying he did it individually, but just more, as a team. Because for Olani, him being there seasons ago or last season, they did beat Vermont. That came off great team play. And that just wasn't there in the second half. And that offense just came to a complete halt. And that allowed Vermont to just dominate the Seawolves on both ends of the ball.
I think it's a good reflection. I think it's a good reflection game for Stony Brook, because I'm gonna think about it in two different ways. Number one, sometimes teams just don't miss, and no matter what you do, they don't miss. So you have to take a look at yourself and say, were we not playing defense, or were they just on fire? And I think that's the first part of it. And then I think, Kenneth, you bring up a good point for the second piece here is it's a time to reflect on what you do in response to that. And if the response to a team hitting their shots is you go and play hero ball and there's really no flow to the offense, you're giving the other team more opportunities now because you're not hitting your shots and you're trying to do more than you should, then that's an opportunity for you to reflect on what you did and improve upon what you did there. Listen, if a team's on fire, there's nothing you can do. Hand in the face, they're still hitting shots. Away you go. But you can have an impact on what you do, right, in that regard. And you're never as good or as bad as you think you are, right? So I think that might be, hopefully for the Seawolves, a lesson from Wednesday night. They're not 98-65. But can they trim enough?
And just on that too, game? Really the crazy part to me is all 19 3-pointers from Vermont, they came from the wing. So it wasn't in any corner threes. All right, they were all on the left or right side, of the wing. And I think maybe one at the top circle or at top key. But, these guys, it's not like they were setting up, in the corner, getting that short shot open. No, a lot of them, especially in that second half, there was just no defense being applied, no pressure being applied on these Vermont shooters. And, you see guys on the transition, maybe on the pick and roll or on the pass, and they're just 2 or 3 steps behind. And again, that was really evident in that second half. And that was a huge difference maker, is just the team shut off in the last 20 minutes. They went 1 for 10 in 20 minutes of action from 3 during those final 20 minutes.
Well, it goes back to what Matt was saying. I'm sorry, Jake, and I'll let you go. Then it just goes back to what Matt was saying. Then they're not just playing good defense. They're not getting them off the line. They're not moving them off their spot. They're just allowing them to do what they want to do. Jake, I'm sorry.
No worries. I think another thing to look at is kind of what's happened with, the men's basketball team in terms of their schedule. Since this new year has come upon us, they've had, a couple postponements to start off January. And then they had that home game against Maine where they, got off to a hot start, had a 15-point lead at the half and let Maine come all the way back and almost take it away. They had a couple key buckets at the end of that one, but kind of since, that halftime in that game, they haven't looked like themselves. And I wonder if, these postponements and having a long break in play, yes, it can, help you rest up and maybe get some, key players like Olani healthy, but, it can also add a little rust to the game and get you somewhat out of sorts as well.
So, Jake, do you think that the postponement today was a good or a bad thing for him?
I was actually thinking about it, when Matt had actually told me that earlier in the week, because I usually, obviously I like to call the games, and I wasn't able to call this one, but since it's getting postponed, there's a chance I might be able to call it. So in my head, for me, selfishly, I was like, maybe it's good I could call the game, but for them, I think it could, make them think, potentially overthink this loss. Yeah, it's all depending on how you look at it. You could overthink the loss and say, what's wrong with us, overthink it. Or you could say, all right, a little time to, sit back and kind of, maybe look at the tape or go over, better game planning for when, either your threes aren't going down or how to, make sure you force those guys off the 3-point line, forcing them to drive. So that way, if you are giving up points, it's 2s instead of 3s.
Yeah, I feel like that answer, we're going to really see it tomorrow based on how the Seawolves play and the results of that. For example, if it's another, big loss, and this time coming against a team against UMBC, who the Seawolves have struggled against recently, then yeah, it kind of goes to show that, these changes are hurting the Seawolves, but also they're not doing themselves any favors if the offense that showed up in that second half and the defense that wasn't there, is what they bring to the table tomorrow. Because they got 3 games they play this week. And like I said last week, this is the hardest part of their schedule in Vermont, UMBC, and then Binghamton. So, this is a team and a week where they got to figure it out because they got 3 games being played and only about 2 days of rest.
I think this is when you got to see the leadership of the team. What players are going to be the team leaders that galvanizes that unit to get them back on track, right? Who's it going to be? Not to put the game on their back, but who's it going to be to unify that team to get them playing together, right? I think that's going to be the key for them on tomorrow, as a matter of fact.
Okay, so UMBC tomorrow, they have played a couple games so far in the America East Conference. They lost to UMass Lowell by 2, beat NJIT by 20, and got stomped on by Vermont in similar fashion what happened to Stony Brook yesterday. 86-69. And yes, Vermont hit a bunch of threes again. 13 for 28 this time. Finn Sullivan got really hot, 6 for 12 from beyond the arc. And you got basically them doing the same thing. So UMBC and Stony Brook are in a very similar position. Both suffered nasty losses to the same team going into this game. Should be a very interesting matchup tomorrow.
Agreed. It's 2 teams I think that really want to prove that they are among the better teams in the conference. We always know how good Vermont is because they're a regular season champ more often than not. I think they have been for the last 4 seasons, right? 5 seasons since 2016, just about. Or last year, I don't believe they were, but it's just to the point. They're always a 1 or 2 seed, and I think for both UMBC and Stony Brook, it's really proving that they should be right there, with the Vermont or the NJIT, who's really finding success. And UMBC, they got a lot to play for too, because last year they weren't even able to really finish out their season. So this is the farthest they've gone in quite a while.
Okay, so the agenda for the Seawolves men and women, both will be playing on Wednesday. The women will be at Binghamton, and the men will be home against Binghamton. Well, the women will be home against Binghamton, and the men will be at Binghamton. Let me read that correctly, because the women's game will, of course, be on WUSB, 6:55 start, as is what we normally do on Wednesdays. And then they're both in business on Saturday, as women will be home against Albany, and which, as of now, and probably will be by the time this game is played, still undefeated in the America East Conference, and the men will be at Albany later that night at 7 p.m. So it's going to be a week that will not necessarily be defining, but definitely an opportunity for the Seawolves to pull ahead and maintain their position in the America East Conference for both sides.
Agreed. Now you're starting to enter the heart of the season, and this is where things really start to pick up, and you start finding out, who teams really are and who's bringing what to the table.
Yeah, are you a contender or are you a pretender? That's what we're going to find out, I think, in the next couple games, right? Are we really going to have an exciting team, or are we going to have a team that we're going to say, okay, they got a puncher's shot in the conference tournament? I think that's what you're looking at.
It's also
one of the things that I see, at least right now, we know Vermont's good, and we know Vermont's going to be in the Seawolves' way. We don't really know who else is going to be in the Seawolves' way en route to an America East Championship. We know Vermont's going to be a problem. No one else has really established themselves as a potential pothole on the road to the championship.
Yeah, and agreed. I think similarly too is, for teams like Vermont and UAlbany and, for, you kind of have those players too who you kind of circle and it's like, yeah, they're going to be the stars of this game. They're really going to bring a lot to the table, especially offensively. For Seawolves in conference play games, but I don't think they found it yet, especially with the return of Olani playing a factor there to where, he's back. And it's a great strength and benefits to this team, but now you got to start feeding him the ball more. And it takes shots away, obviously, from Roberts, Green, Jenkins, who are really the three primary scorers for this squad in non-conference play. And especially for Jenkins, who I think stepped up more often than not offensively for the squad. You haven't really seen that yet so far. And I think this week we're going to see which one of those four, I think. Maybe Frankie Policelli comes in as well. Maybe Tyler Stevenson Moore. One of those guys starts to step up for the squad and really becomes that primary.
Yeah, I also think you got to wonder how they complement each other. They've played separate. They've had their postponements, like Jake was saying, so they haven't had an opportunity to really get together and play together. Now, how do we get those two guys to play together and to get that engine going? I think that is the key for the men's team.
Yeah, you bring up Ken. You bring up Jaleel Jenkins, and watching him play this season, I think his greatest moments are he has a lot of success when he starts by getting to the basket and getting to the free throw line, and then working off of that, it opens up his shot from the 3-point line. And I think sometimes he just comes into the game trying to fire from 3-point line, sometimes even deep threes. And then if he misses a couple to start off, he, gets a little shy for the rest of the game. And it kind of gets the team in a bad way, at times. And with the return of Olani, Tyler Stevenson Moore's minutes have kind of gone down a little bit. And I thought he was a big contributor for them in that kind of middle run of games, both on offense, but also on defense. He's a pretty lengthy, guy, and he can be trouble on the defensive end. We saw him come up with that key block at the end of one of the games earlier in the season, to seal a victory. I think that was over St. Peter's in December. So curious to see how coach works the minutes, after a rough loss in Vermont.
I think that's really an excellent point, right? Like, what's going to be the balancing act for them? And I do think Stevenson Moore is a guy that he probably does deserve some more playing time. But, right, it's that balancing act you have to do as a coach. That's why they get paid, is to figure that stuff out.
Yeah, no doubt about it.